Hi, James Proctor here, and welcome back to part 2 of our 3-part series on the Southwest Airlines scheduling meltdown. So in part 1, we talked about data-oriented business rules that create that firm foundation for deeper analysis. In part 2, we're going to talk about the transactional side. In part 1, we're talking about what are the things we need to know about and what are the rules governing those data-oriented business rules. And in part 2, we're talking about the transactional side. What are the kinds of things we need to do, and what are the underlying rules of the things we need to do in order to do crew scheduling? Okay, so James Proctor here, and I'm your host for part 2 as well. So let's go ahead, dig in, and let's get started. Remember, I did the third part of the live webinar just a few days ago. So it's a couple days later, and I'm reducing this now, or actually summarizing it into a tight 3-part series. All right, so let's go, and let's start with, let's go. All right, let's see here. Here we go. So the why are we here question. Part 1, 2, and 3, I always start with that. Better requirements, right? That's what we do as business analysts. Our big part of our job is get better requirements, really to identify, analyze, and specify requirements, but we want great requirements, complete, unambiguous, fully validated requirements. Now, why is that important? Because great business requirements enable the technical side to build great business systems, build, configure, these kinds of things, great business systems. We want effective functionality, great customer experiences, less maintenance, delivered faster, all these kinds of things. Now, that's a waypoint as well, because I love to do requirements. I love being involved in building nice, complex business systems. But that's a waypoint to better business process, right? Because that's what it's all about, is business process is where value is created. Makes an organization more effective, more efficient in what we do, all right? So better systems help us, doesn't drive better business process, but it enables better business process, right? And why is that important? Because we want to create great customer and business value, delighted stakeholders, and those kinds of things. So it starts with great requirements, and that's really the discussion we're having here in part 1, part 2, and part 3. So how are we going to do it? Well, in part 1, we dealt with data-oriented business rules, all right? And we're just going to do a quick recap here of that in just a few minutes. And go back, I'd encourage you to go back, if you haven't, go back to look at the part 1 video. Here in part 2, we're identifying and analyzing the transactional and business data analytic requirements. Right? Those travel together. In part 3, we're going to bring it together and start running some critical scenarios and look at how our systems and processes, what happens when they're stressed, right? Weather's closing in, flights are getting canceled, things need to happen, crews are coming in late, and these kinds of things. And how do our systems and processes cope with that? All right, and I have a hypothesis for what happened as well. All right, so we're going to talk about that. So let's talk about right now, though, what we're going to do here in part 2. All right. I call it the business systems requirements problem, right? And there's 3 concepts here: identifying, analyzing, specifying requirements. Those are 3 different concepts, different techniques, different things we do. So we're going to talk a little bit about identifying requirements, a little bit about analyzing requirements here, just to kind of give us some context there, particularly in the space of crew scheduling. We're going to talk about actors and interactions. One of the things I talked about back in all the way back in part 1, that could have been maybe an hour ago for some of you, but the point is, I talk about making that shift from analog to digital. A big part of identifying and analyzing requirements is to use visual diagrams, process maps, activity diagrams, these kinds of things. Right, which we'll be talking about here in part 2. Now, a big part of what we're doing here is identifying actors and interactions. Actors are people or systems, right, that interact with each other, right, to achieve some goal or outcome, the requirements, if you will. Visually, we're going to look at something called an interaction context diagram, which is a visual technique for engaging subject matter experts to help us identify requirements. Not to analyze them, but just identify the requirements even exist. We're going to talk about something called activity sequence diagrams that now enable us to analyze those requirements. We'll talk a little bit about analytic requirements. They're essential and often overlooked, right? Those are the things that help us make decisions, give us metrics, these kinds of things. And we're always talking about engaging subject matter experts. And using visual diagrams is a really core technique to engage and have that high quality conversation with our subject matter experts. All right, so let's move on. All right, the concept was, right, we talked about it in part one. It's really, there's two concepts here, or two parts to analysis. What are the kinds of things we do, and what are the kinds of things we need to know about in order to do the things we need to do? All right. So at the top half, we're dealing with business work activities and business processes, all the things we do. I got to schedule a flight. I got to create a crew. I got to assign an aircraft to a particular flight leg. I got to dispatch that flight leg. All right. Verb nouns. What do we do? What do we do it to? Now, the bottom half of the framework is which was where we started back in part one. We talked about the nouns themselves. What's a flight? What's a crew? What's an aircraft? What's a flight leg? Right? Often these things are kind of fuzzy and ambiguous, and we want to understand what those things mean. I call that the business vocabulary. So I'd encourage you, if you haven't watched the part one video, go back and watch that first, because part two will make a lot more sense. All right. So the organization's business vocabulary, the terms and concepts, are essential to understanding, right, what the business is all about, so we can start identifying and having those high quality conversations with our subject matter experts. All right, so we started off with understanding, right, what is the heck, somebody says flight, what do they mean, right? And we went a little more detail on this in part one, but I want to summarize it here, is at its core, right, I had to do some digging, right? And this is a lot of things we do as a business analyst. And if we have some really knowledgeable subject matter experts, we can nail this stuff really quick. But if we don't, we got to kind of go figure some things out. So I said, well, all right, I want to go from Denver to Miami. Well, one way to do that is, this is my itinerary here. I can go flight 22, let me turn on my pointer here. I can take flight 2240, which has two legs, right? First leg on 2240 is from Denver to Tulsa. The second leg is from Tulsa to Houston. I changed flights in Houston to flight 43, and flight 43 takes me from Houston to Miami. All right, so a flight consists of one or more flight legs, right? And so typically, not always, well, a particular flight, typically you're not changing planes. You could, though. Typically, it's a particular crew that is on that particular flight, but it could change it per flight leg. All right, then I change in Houston. I take another flight leg over here from Houston to Miami. So really, the core underlying concept, particularly when we speak to the concept of crew scheduling, comes down to the flight leg, right? Not so much the flight, because I have a particular plane I'm going to dispatch for this particular flight leg. That particular plane has to have a captain, it's got to have a first officer, it has to have a number of flight attendants and other things as well. So that's what crew scheduling all is about. I got to make sure that particular flight leg, right between Denver and Tulsa here, has all the right crew on it. I have to have the flight deck crew, I've got to have the cabin crew, I got to have maybe some other crews as well, but that's what it's all about, is scheduling those. And we talked about the data-oriented business rules back in section one. So very busy slide, but we brought some concepts together. I'm just going to do a quick 1 minute recap here, but I encourage you to go back to part one to really get the essence of this if you haven't yet. So we started off with a little framework here. What the heck is a flight leg, right? And through that conversation of a flight leg, we identified a lot of other things, right? Flight legs, trips, associates, aircraft, all kinds of things. And we started to define some of those things. If you just do that as a business analyst working with your subject matter experts, just identify the business vocabulary, really make a list of the terms and concepts, the things you need to know about, and define them at some basic level of specificity, right? So everybody says, yeah, that's what we mean by flight, that's what we mean by flight leg and things like that. Now you've got something to work with. I can even then go deeper and say, well, for the flight leg here, what are the things I want to know about a flight leg? Well, a particular flight leg has to have an origin and destination airport. Denver to Houston. No. Our example was Denver to Tulsa, Tulsa to Houston, Houston to Miami, right? Those are each individual flight legs, right? And I can't go from every airport in the world to every airport in the world in my network at Southwest Airlines. I've got allowable pairs that we've pre-designated, right? And a flight eventually is going to have an origin gate and a destination gate, and a particular flight would have some passengers that are booked on that particular flight, and that particular flight leg has an aircraft and a particular tail number, and we have our associates, right, our pilots and flight attendants and such, they can bid on various trips in connection with those flight legs, and those kinds of things, right? So what we did is I'd encourage you to go to part 1, and we dig in this and deeper. But the point is, on the bottom half of the framework, we're dealing with the concept of what are the things we want to know about, and what do we want to know about those things, all right? That gives us that firm foundation for deeper analysis. Okay, so let's now move on to part 2 here. Identifying and analyzing key transactional and analytic requirements. So we come back to our crew scheduling problem, right? Given a published flight schedule of a particular airline, the key tasks to assign all the necessary crew members and the flight deck crew and the cabin crew in such a way that we can operate that particular flight in conformance with regulations and our own internal things, right? And we have to consider all kinds of things, government regulations, union agreements, company-specific rules, all kinds of things to make sure we have our particular crews that are eligible to fly a particular flight leg, in place to be able to fly that particular flight leg. So our crew scheduling problem leads us to what I call the business systems requirements problems, right? How do we identify and analyze transactional and analytic business systems requirements to support crew scheduling? In my experience, I've been doing this for a long time, so have many of you as well. Many organizations, not all, I'm just use the word many there, struggle to simply identify a comprehensive list of requirements. Here are the 100 things we need to achieve by a new crew management system, right? Much less analyze and specify those requirements. Remember, there's 3 concepts. We have to analyze, identify, analyze, and specify requirements. Just identifying the requirements is a challenge for many organizations, right? So let's start off with that, and then we'll kind of go into the world of analysis a little bit. All right, up on the screen, actually, what I'm going to do right now, because I want to be able to zoom up on this better, I'm going to pull into view. Let's see, I've got a Visio diagram here. Go. All right, so this is part 2, and everybody will get this diagram. It's big. It's like 1.5 by 2 feet. It's a big blow-up diagram, but it's easier to see it rather than looking at it on the. Let's see. I'll go over here. That's probably the right level of resolution. Okay, so an interaction context diagram is a visual way to engage your subject matter experts to identify the requirements. We're not talking about analyzing or specifying. We just need to identify a requirement. So we start off with, I have a little circle here. We'll call it, it's called our target system. We're identifying requirements in the context of our target system. Then we have to identify the actors. Actors is just a fancy word for saying the people or the systems that interact with our target systems. Right? And the third concept is the concept of interaction. What are the things we need out of our particular system? Right? So here on the side is just a little definition. Target system talks about the system responsible. Actor, we're talking about what we call primary actors here, the people or systems that are actually interacting with the system. An interaction, aka a requirement, is a particular actor interacting with a target system, right, to achieve some goal or outcome. That is the classic definition of a business system requirement. A particular actor interacting with a particular target system to achieve some goal or outcome of that interaction. All right. So the first thing we do is just say, okay, we got this thing called CMS, Crew Management System. And we start identifying our actors. And there's many, many people. We just pulled a few out here just to keep it simple for the purpose of our little part 2 webinar here. But, well, we have a scheduler, people that schedule airline, the crews and things like that. We have associates. So those are the people, the pilots, the flight attendant, and other people that need to be scheduled. We have dispatchers. They're the ones that actually dispatch, actual physical aircraft to a particular flight leg. We have the operations staff that's assigning gate and guide and many other things as well. We have an external system, right? Because our actors can be human actors, dispatchers, schedulers, associates. We could have other human actors as well. We could have a lot of external system actors. There's systems that interact with our systems. For example, we have TBS here, Travel Booking System. Now, I just made up the term Travel Booking System. There's lots of different, but for the purpose of this discussion. But when we're scheduling crews and creating itineraries for the crews, right, and crews are bidding on things, as those bids and those actually bids and really the itinerary, if you will, for our flight crews are being assigned, because we're going from one flight leg on another flight leg to one airport to another. Somewhere in that whole 2 or 3 day itinerary set of flight legs, we have to have some rest period between them, right? We just can't fly we can't fly continually leg after leg after leg after leg for 3 or 4 days, right? We have to have some rest stop. So after a certain flight leg, maybe we eventually end up in Dallas or something. We end up in Houston or wherever we end up in, or maybe we end up in wherever. It doesn't matter. It's maybe a crew member or a group of crew members have reached a certain duty cycle, right? You can only fly so many hours in a certain day. So after they finish that flight leg, they go to go outside the airport, and there's a van that picks them up and takes them to a particular hotel, and then in the morning the van picks them up, takes them back. So travel booking system is all about booking the hotels and things. So there's a lot going on with TBS. There's a lot of actors that interact with TBS, but all we're concerned with for the purpose of CMS is the interactions between CMS and TBS. All right, so let's look at some of the interactions here. Let's start with a scheduler. All right. I'm going to create or revise a particular flight, and I'm going to create and revise various flight legs. So I'm going to reach out to the system, say I got to create a flight, and flight 2240, and there's some attributes we know about 40. Once we create flight 2240, I can actually then start assigning legs to 2240. So I'm going to create that whole flight schedule. Associate, they could bid on a trip, and we're going to dig into that actual interaction here in just a little bit. So I'm a particular, whatever it is, I'm a flight attendant, I'm a first officer, I'm a captain, whatever. But I'm going to bid on a particular trip, and over, it could be a 1 day trip, it could be a 3 day trip, a 5 day trip, and they're predefined trips, right? And I'm going to bid on those things, right? And because based on my various preferences and qualifications. CMS is going to reach out to an associate. Maybe there's a change in a flight leg. Maybe it's being delayed, or maybe it's been moved to a different gate and things like that. So CMS is going to notify our assignment of various things. Operations, right? They're very tactical. They're assigning a particular gate, and there's probably a lot of other things that operations is doing. We already talked about TBS, and the system itself can be both the target and both the target and the actor. All right, we're going to update a trip, associate trip automatically when a particular flight leg comes in. People at the gate probably checking in as complete or something like that, updates the crew member schedule and these kinds of things automatically. All right, now here's what's cool. All right, this is a very, very simple context diagram, but it illustrates the point I want to make, is that it doesn't matter how complex the target system is. It could be very complex. And CMS, if we actually were to build a complete crew management system, it's a very complex system, right? Lots of moving parts, a lot of actors and things like that. There might be 1,000 requirements that CMS has to support. But what's interesting, there's only five I gotta get all my fingers in the thumb. There's only 5 types of requirements. That's it. You could have 1,000 requirements, but there are only 5 types of requirements. Now, once you understand that concept and understand what each one of those 5 types are, when you start engaging your subject matter experts, you can kind of think about those things and engage and start asking questions in and around those 5 types of requirements. For example, a type 1 requirement is an interaction between a business end user, right, or a human actor, if you will, and a target system that's initiated by the end user, right? So bid on trip is a good example. That's a type 1 interaction. Me, the associate, maybe I'm a first officer, I'm going to reach out, engage the system, hit the button that says, bid on trip, right? So it's a type 1 interaction. Now, bid on trip has a lot of what we call the interaction flow of events, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So there's a lot of rules of engagement between that actor and the system to bid on a trip. But we just want to identify the fact that requirement exists. I want to bid on a trip, all right? That's a type 1, a human actor reaching out to engage our target system. A type 2 interaction is when a type 2 is when the target system reaches out to engage a human actor, right? CMS is going to notify associates of flight leg changes. So based on all kinds of things going on and changes in flight schedules and flight legs and things getting late or canceled or whatever, it's going to reach out and notify the associate of changes of various things. That's type 2, the system reaching out to engage a human actor. Type 3 is when our target system reaches out to engage another system. All right, so CMS, once we've got the various bids and flight legs, we bid and trips and all those kinds of things, the system's going to reach out, probably not the system, but probably somebody interacting with the system is going to reach out to the travel booking system through CMS, right, to start, booking various systems, various hotels and things like that. A type 4 is when our external system reaches out to engage the target system, right? We're going to provide update bookings, crew travels, things like that. Once somebody in a travel booking has actually booked various things, it's going to reach out to CMS. CMS is probably in return going to reach out to an associate that says, okay, here's your itinerary, or here's your changes in itinerary, and things like that. And number 5 is when the system, typically based on some type of trigger, or a timing trigger, an event trigger or something, it's just going to do something of its own volition without any other human or system actor, right? Maybe it's going to update an associate's trip based on maybe a particular flight is coming in late, your flight came in late, maybe they signed you to a different flight leg because you came in so late, and they signed another crew to a different one. So it's going to update you automatically on those kinds of things. Okay, that's the basic concept there. So now we've identified some requirements, and there's there's many others as well. So what we do next, let me just slide this over just a little bit. The interaction context diagram in Agile speak is a low fidelity diagram. It's just it's a technique. We'd be out on a whiteboard, a flip chart. We could be on the system using Visio or something like that. It's just a way of having a discussion with our subject matter experts. But once we've identified our requirements here, right, we've done the heavy lifting, because each one of these arrows represents a candidate requirement. Now, as we go deeper into analysis, we might find that certain things might consolidate, some might expand, we don't know. But we have a set of candidate requirements. So what we do is we create a list of requirements. A scheduler creates a flight leg, a scheduler creates a trip, a dispatcher dispatches an aircraft, operations assigns a gate, and so on and so forth. So for each arrow on our context diagram, we just start listing it out. We've already done the heavy lifting. It's easy because we have verb nouns for all of these things, and we just list it out. So now we have a list of requirements. So coming full circle, what I talked about earlier, most organizations just struggle, many organizations anyhow struggle, to get a good, cohesive, complete list of requirements. Well, here's how we do it. We just talk to our subject matter experts. We create a context diagram. It could be a whiteboard, and we're just putting things and drawing arrows and talking about it. But it really engages those subject matter experts. But our goal is to ultimately just come up with a list of requirements. All right, so now we have a list of requirements. What's the next thing we have to do? Well, we said there's 3 concepts, right? We have to identify, analyze, and specify requirements. So the next thing we have to do is analyze each of our requirements. Right? We have to go a little deeper now, right? What are the rules of engagement between the actor and the interaction? So here we have it. Let's just take one of them. We could have 1,000 requirements here, right? But one of them is associate bids on trip. So what we're asking now is, how does that actor interact with that target system to achieve a goal or outcome? In this particular case, they want to be able to submit a bid for a trip. All right, so let's go down and go to the next level. We're still staying visual, right? Or as I call it, analog to digital. We want to create diagrams because that's what's engaging to our subject matter experts. Let's see, let me just zoom up here a little bit more. Okay, so now we're going to go a little bit deeper. We've got the requirement bid on trip, right? There it is right there. It's right here, right? Set our list of requirements. We got it from our context diagram over here. Here's bid on trip. It's in our list of requirements, bid on trip. This thing can go away now, right? Once we have our list. We can take each one of these and start doing some deeper analysis. And where that deeper analysis starts is we're just asking, how does that actor engage the system? And what are the rules and sequence of engagement to achieve that goal or outcome? All right, so monthly, or we could maybe even say periodically throughout the month, the associate selects, so I log in to the crew scheduling system, crew scheduling system, hit the button that says, I have lots of things I can do as an associate, but one of the things I can do is click that button that says create trip. All right, so I select, or bid on trip, I should say. We have a precondition, you have to be signed in. All right, so the system displays selection criteria and search fields. It's going to allow you to say, well, on this particular, next month, here are the days I'd like to fly. I can't fly these particular days. I'd like to maybe stay domestic versus international, whatever it is. It displays a lot of criteria that you might want to select. All right. Now, the system already knows things on your profile and what are some of your preferences and things like that. But now we're actually bidding on a trip and we want to be a little bit more detailed. So it allows you to select additional filtering criteria. So it displays the selection criteria screen. The associate selects various criteria and hits submit. The system then displays eligible trips. It calculates based on your selections and based on your profile and eligibility and credentials what kind of aircraft types I'm eligible to fly and fly on and those kinds of things. And so it would take all that into account and only display the trips that particular associate is eligible to bid on based on all that credentialing things that the system already knows and based on your more detailed selections here. So now it's back to the associate now. The associate reviews the trips, selects trips that they're interested in. I'm just picking this trip. I want to go from here to here. It's a 3-day trip. It's a 2-day trip, whatever it is. So I'm trying to fill out a schedule for the month, and I bid on my trips. I prioritize certain trips, right? And so I hit submit. Now there's some outcomes there. As a associate, all right, I can then maybe I don't like what I see, and I can go back and play with it a little bit and go through this loop a number of times and keep trying criteria in different trips I might want to pick. I could select remove trip if I want, right? Maybe I have one I don't want. The system displays it, but eventually the system displays bid confirmation screen, right, and other options. And then, so from there, I make some decisions as well. I could go all the way back. I could revise my selections. I could select eligible trips again without them, just go back to here without reselecting. Or I could select, end or submit, and the system ends the session and displays the bids. All right, and there's probably more. There's a lot more detail in there as well, but that's a starting point. All right, and then we can come back periodically and maybe revise a trip, add some more trips, bid on some additional trips, and things like that. All right, and so user action, system response. Along the way, we probably meet one of the things we would play. Here's where that deep level, and I'd call it the secret sauce of analysis. Once we kind of frame out the initial flow of events here, user action, system response. Then I work with my subject matter experts, and I play the break-fix game. I say, okay, what are we missing here, right? Maybe I'd probably talk to some, various crew members, right? I'd talk to maybe some captains and first officers. I'd talk to maybe another session. I'd talk to some flight attendants. I'd say, well, tell me a little bit more about what really goes on when you're bidding for a trip. What other things happen? They go, oh, we haven't, this thing has to happen over here, and this thing happens over here, and I kind of forgot about this, and sometimes we have to do this. Man, that is solid gold, because what I find is when you go visual, right, start creating these kinds of diagrams in a particular sequence, people really get it, because their mind, if it's just a blank slate, they just can't connect with everything. But once they see something, particularly you start with a diagram, and I usually tell people, look, my diagram here, it's most assuredly wrong at this point, but it's a starting place, right? Because you don't want to present it saying, okay, this is how it works. This is kind of based on some initial analysis. Here's what I think, and we start iterating, and very quickly it'd expand out, and we get those underlying business rules. I'd probably then, as we expand it out, I'd probably talk to like maybe a flight scheduler or something and say, does this look right as well? Am I missing something over here? And we just keep iterating until we get it right. It doesn't take long, right? Just go visual. The first thing you do is just create you work with your different subject matter experts, identify some requirements, make that list of requirements over here, then start doing deeper analysis on each of the requirements. And I'm also asking along the way, to make certain decisions, what do you need to know? And there's going to be some analytic requirements. This particular, for example, based on historic things, this particular flight, leg, right? Is at 90% on-time departure rate, things like this. This one a little less. And there's just a lot of different metrics in business analytics that would help out. And I ask about those things. What are kinds of things you need to know to help you make the decisions? And so we make sure we capture that and maybe go back to the data model, make sure we got the attributes in there, make sure we're capturing the right data in our flow of events over here. Okay, let's go back to, I think that's it. And again, everybody will get this as well. All right, so we talked about that. So that'll be in our diagram. We talked about that. We talked about that. We talked about this over here, right? Because one of the key takeaways that I want you to go away with is this is just a talking tool, right? Once we have this, we just take each one of these lines and create a candidate requirement for it. All right. Then we take that candidate requirement, in this case, bid on trips. We start creating the interaction flow of events, user action system response. We're still staying digital here, right? See, there's one other concept here. I think that should come in. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about use cases for just a second. Use case is a very excellent technique if you understand it from the right perspective. A use case is a standard for documenting requirements. It's not an analysis technique. It's a documentation standard. Under UML, which is controlled by OMB, Object Management Group, right? There's basically 9 things we need to know to fully specify a requirement. The first 3 things, name of the requirement, actors, and a description, is what we call the header or summary level of the use case. The name of the requirement, bid on trip, who can do it, various associates, flight attendants, the cabin crew, these kinds of things. Just a brief description of what it means. Then we go the deeper analysis. Now we go down to flow of events, right? What are the various scenarios? The baseline scenario, alternative exception scenarios. And data involved, right? We do that back in section 1 or part 1, right? What are the things we need to know about to enable these kinds of things to happen? Because they all work together, right? And then other business rules and requirements. So that's the concept of a use case. So as we start doing, once we've identified our requirements, we start doing analysis, right? We start filling out the various components of a use case to document that particular requirement. So identify, analyze, and specify. The context diagram, right, helps us identify requirements. The interaction flow of events helps us analyze requirements along with the conceptual data model, right? The use case enables us to specify the requirement. So we just want one specification, not different ones for different constituencies. It's one specification for a requirement that subject matter experts can look at, analysts can look at, technical people can look at, right, and come away with the same understanding of a requirement. Okay, so let's think about that a little bit. Data-oriented business rules we talked about in part 1. We have our training courses in logical and advanced data modeling. The things we talked about today, we go into very deep detail in our business systems analysis course. The whole concept of identifying, analyzing, and specifying requirements. So something you might want to consider there. The Agile course applies Agile techniques to that. Then, of course, our soft skills course, it really talks about how to improve your skills for engaging subject matter experts. Okay, and also, if you like this 3-part video series, feel free to recommend that to your friends and colleagues. All they have to do is go to inteqgroup.com/I love Southwest Airlines, ILUVSWA Southwest Airlines, and they'll be able to get access to the 3-part video series, the handouts, and these kinds of things. Okay, so that's part 2. Part 3 is where we bring it together and start running some critical scenarios and have some fun with it and talk about, okay, now, heavy weather is moving in, right? Maybe even more weather than we predicted. Things are breaking down. Aircrafts are not, coming in late. They're not coming in at all. Some things get canceled because we can't get out and go to the next destination. So as it's really about stress testing our requirements and our business process and our business systems really, and see how it, what happens when it gets stress tested like that. Okay, so I'll see you in part 3 when you're ready. And James Proctor, I'm out. See you in part 3. Bye-bye.